This is the iPhone 16 Pro Max. Compare with Samsung S24 Ultra. Both fully charged. Let's go.
Hey friends, this video was translated using a neural network, so the sound quality isn't the best. If you want to listen to the original sound from a smartphone and hear the audio recording test, just follow the link in the description to our original video. Hey friends, before we start the tests, I want to point out that I recorded the video and photos on the iPhone 16 Pro Max with HDR turned on, since it's enabled by default, so please keep that in mind while watching the video.
Well friends, we have our first test, as always. These are the front cameras of the iPhone 16 Pro Max shooting in 4K 60 FPS. And the Samsung S24 Ultra also shoots in 4K 60 FPS. This is how our shot looks against the light. The sun is shining from behind. How does the dynamic range perform on smartphones? On the iPhone 16 Pro Max, the picture looks more sandy, while on the Samsung, it's more contrasty.
On the iPhone 16 Pro Max, the image looks overexposed with a sandy tint, and overall the picture is a bit washed out. Personally, I like the results from Samsung more. The colors look livelier, richer, and more contrasted, and the sky is clearer. The stabilization on the 16 Pro Max worked better. On the S24 Ultra, the picture shakes more.
The cinematic effect with background blur, iPhone 16 Pro Max is shooting at 4K 30 frames per second, and the Samsung S24 Ultra is also at 4K 30 frames per second. And this is how it all looks for us. Well, right now on the iPhone, I have the blur set to 2.8 f2.8. On the Samsung, well, I think it's a bit less, probably f4, something like that. Right, during the shoot we can change the blur. And on the Samsung, I've also set the blur to 6, while on the iPhone 16 Pro Max, we have the blur set to 2.8. And this is how our 4K 60 FPS shot looks with the ultra-wide lens.
Both work very well with background blur, although in some places there are noticeable flaws at the blur border. As for color reproduction, it's the same, so I won't go over that again. The stabilization worked equally well on both, no questions there. The front camera on the new model is 12 megapixels f1.9. In terms of specs, it doesn't differ at all from the previous generation. The Samsung also has a 12 megapixel front camera f2.2. The iPhone 16 Pro Max is equipped with a 48 megapixel main camera, an ultra-wide camera, and a 12 megapixel telephoto lens. In the previous generation, the ultra-wide camera had a resolution of 12 megapixels. Samsung has a main camera with 200 megapixels, an ultra-wide camera with 50 megapixels, and two telephoto lenses with 12 and 10 megapixels.
And this is how our shot looks in 4K 60 FPS with the ultra-wide lens. And this is how the picture looks. Again, the light is behind me, the sun is shining behind me. So, how does it all look? How does the picture look? And this is how it looks when we're shooting, with the sun shining from the side. This is how it all looks.
The picture from the ultra-wide on both smartphones looks pretty much the same in terms of quality. When comparing the ultra-wide pictures taken by both smartphones, they appear to be quite similar in terms of overall image quality and detail. The only difference is in the field of view and again in the colors. And I like how it looks on Samsung more. The S24 Ultra handled the running shot better. The iPhone has more background wobble and jitters. When shooting everything around, the results turned out to be very similar again, but in terms of colors, Samsung is my favorite. The sky is clearer on it, it's really blue, and overall the picture doesn't have that yellow tint like on the iPhone. The stabilization worked very similarly here, so let's move on.
And now we're shooting with the main camera module at 24mm, x1, 4K 60 FPS on both smartphones. The sun is coming out, so it will be interesting to see how the main camera module performs against the sun and how the dynamic range works.
The main camera handled the sun better on the Samsung, while the iPhone completely blew out the sky. There's really no difference in the video quality itself, and again, the main difference is just in color reproduction, and here I will also prefer the S24. The The stabilization works equally well, so I'm flipping the camera. The picture turned out to be almost identical here. The smartphones handled the direct sunlight equally well. The colors turned out to be very similar, except that the iPhone's video is again brighter. The 16 Pro Max might have handled the running shot just a bit smoother, but the difference is minimal. At 2x zoom, the iPhone has a slight edge in quality. We're looking at the tiles, the grass, the signs, the buildings, but there's no difference in stabilization. The same goes for the running shot. Both handled it smoothly, no questions there. The stabilization worked well and the picture quality was fine. When shooting while moving, results are similar. The blur was great, but Samsung lost focus a few times. If we're shooting everything around, whether walking or running, it all looks pretty much the same.
So we're currently shooting portrait video at 4K 30 FPS with the main lens along with a blur effect on absolutely amazing iPhone 16 Pro Max where I've set aperture to f2.8. On Samsung device we have blur set 5. How's picture looking? How's background being captured? It's really interesting, which is quite fascinating indeed.
The blur on both smartphones turned out great, but unfortunately the Samsung did lose focus a few times. No such problems were noticed on the iPhone. The iPhone handled the run excellently, the stabilization is smooth, and I'm in focus. The Samsung also keeps it steady, but it loses focus again.
This cinematic effect is just a super mode that's implemented best on the iPhone. Right now, I can see my face in focus, meaning the frame highlights my face and everything else is blurred. Even Maya is standing next to me, and her face is still out of focus, while on the Samsung, everything is in focus. iPhone 16 Pro Max, portrait shooting at 4K 30 FPS, and you can see that I'm in focus while Maya isn't in focus. On the Samsung S24 Ultra, it visually looks like we're both in focus. And now I'm turning around. Maya, look at the camera. Did something happen? You're in focus, right? So, on both the iPhone and the Samsung, right? But I'm not in focus. Now I'm turning around again. And now I'm in focus again. The iPhone keeps Maya constantly in focus. If I click on Maya now, super. Now I'm out of focus, right? And Maya is in focus. I tried to do the same on the Samsung, and I'm trying to highlight Maya now, but for some reason, the focus has completely shifted to the building. It's really strange. It loses focus, while everything looks just amazing on the iPhone. And now I'm in focus, and Maya is out of focus. On the iPhone, everything is very convenient. It locks onto the face and keeps it in focus, while the Samsung doesn't do that.
There's no doubt that with two people in the frame, the iPhone performed better. It had no competition here, but we have the toughest test left. A tracking shot circling around a person. The iPhone's portrait mode is the best among smartphones. Samsung lost focus quickly but handled tracking well, without frame drops. We're interested in blur edges. No complaints here. The Samsung started losing focus almost immediately, but it handled the tracking shot quite well this time. We're interested in looking at the edges of the blur because not all smartphones handle long hair. Both the 16 Pro Max and the S24 Ultra handled hair well, but unfortunately the Samsung started losing focus again. That's sad.
Hey friends, today we have really strong wind, and right now we're going to test the audio recording on these smartphones in such powerful wind conditions. Right now friends, we have a little breeze and I'm recording with the iPhone 16 Pro Max and the Samsung S24 Ultra. Right now I'm using the front microphone on the Samsung S24 Ultra, but you can't choose the microphone on the iPhone 16 Pro Max. But on the Samsung you can do this by using the professional video recording mode. It's really interesting to hear how this will perform because honestly the wind is really strong today, because the previous generation of iPhone, the iPhone 15 Pro Max, did a very poor job of recording sound. Right now I have the Samsung S24 Ultra set to omnidirectional audio recording. The wind is blowing and the iPhone is recording audio by default, so we'll listen to how this works. I've activated the front microphone, so hopefully the audio recording quality should improve. Let's listen and compare audio recording. iPhone 16 Pro Max or Samsung S24 Ultra. Activating the rear microphone records from the back. We'll hear the sound with the rear mic. Samsung is set to regular video, same as iPhone 16 Pro Max. We can hear the difference with mic selection on Samsung. Samsung S24 Ultra records in 8K at 30 FPS. And again, we'll be able to hear how the sound comes through when we activate the rear microphone. And now I've activated regular video recording on the Samsung, which is not professional video without microphone selection. So it's exactly the same mode that works on the iPhone 16 Pro Max. So again, we can listen to the difference between when you can choose the microphone on the Samsung S24 Ultra and when you can't.
At the end of this test, I can say that the 16 Pro Max now matches the Samsung in sound recording quality. You can hear the wind, but it doesn't drown out the voice. You can hear me clearly, my voice isn't muffled. Overall, I think it's an excellent result.
The Samsung S24 Ultra can record in 8K at 30 frames per second. And the iPhone still can't do that. It can only do 4K at 60 FPS. Let's compare. Is there a difference? Samsung S24 does 8K at 30 FPS, iPhone 16 Pro Max does 4K at 60 FPS.
Honestly, you can't really see any differences between 8K and 4K with the naked eye. Both images are detailed and sharp. Samsung's 8K stabilization holds up well, on par with the iPhone. When shooting everything around in detail, the differences in 8K are more noticeable. Tiles, greenery, signs, the building looks clearer, but I wouldn't say that it's that much. The run here was a bit smoother on the iPhone, but overall the S24 Ultra did pretty well too. I also tried shooting against the sun, and the glare on the Samsung was less, plus the sky looks better overall.
So the picture should already be bright and vibrant, and the sunset in the background should look beautiful. Here and on the Samsung S24 Ultra, we're currently shooting in 4K at 30 frames. How's the picture looking? Leave your comments below. Which HDR is better?
The final image from the smartphones turned out interesting, but with its own nuances. The iPhone 16 Pro Max has significantly more light bleed in the sky. On the S24 Ultra, the skin looks a bit too red. If you compare regular iPhone video with ProRes RAW HDR, the latter turns out even more sandy. But the sky here is more vibrant and beautiful. I also tried to shoot a landscape. I like the picture from the iPhone better here. The quality and detail are noticeably better. We're looking at the grass and the buildings. The glare in the sky is less. Plus, on the Samsung, there's some chromatic aberration along the poles and the edges of the buildings. It doesn't look great. With 2x zoom, it's pretty much the same, but the sky looks better on the S24.
The logarithmic profile activated and currently being utilized in our testing environment, and the iPhone can easily shoot in a logarithmic profile, while the Samsung S24 Ultra can't do that. But right now I set it to HDR10+, and here's how it looks shooting in logarithmic mode on the iPhone 16 Pro Max and HDR10+ on the Samsung S24 Ultra, 4K at 30 frames per second.
We painted the picture with the standard Apple Loot, Turex 709 log, with a little tweaking of the curves. I personally like the graded log on the iPhone. Image quality beats Samsung HDR, especially in details. At the same time, the image quality is noticeably better than the HDR on the Samsung. Again, we're looking at the grass, buildings, and other details.
Alright friends, let's see how this button actually works. And actually, if you don't press it, it doesn't work at all. I'm not pressing it, just touching it, and it doesn't work at all. But if I press it a little, focal length starts to change. How I do it right on the screen, I just wish I could change it all at once. Now we can swipe down and accordingly control it. So we can control the camera and zoom in like this, 0.5x, 1x, 2x, 5x. While shooting, we can only change the zoom and the cameras. We hit pause, and now we can change things like exposure in photo mode. We can adjust focus, we can change the exposure, we can zoom in, we can switch cameras, and we can change styles. Honestly, I don't really need this button. That's how it works. And if we switch to portrait mode, we can adjust the depth of field here. I think it's much easier to control it on the screen. We're recording and starting to change the focal length. You can see the transition. So when we switch from the ultra-wide lens to the wide-angle lens,
You can clearly see a small jump in exposure here, and the focal length works a bit differently. Next we zoom in, and here, when the telephoto lens is turned on, we see that transition again, and it happens just the same when we go back. And now let's see how this will look on the Samsung. We hit record and let's go. We're changing the focal length.
On the Samsung, the zoom smoothness is pretty much the same as on the iPhone, but the overall issue on both is the exposure jumps when switching from the ultra-wide to the main camera and back. So let's test the quality and range of the zoom, and you can immediately see that Apple has improved the ultra-wide on the 16 Pro Max. Looking at the grass and buildings, we can see that the picture is sharper. When zooming in, there's not much difference in detail. Main camera 1x, the picture is pretty much the same, so let's zoom in. The 2x digital zoom on both smartphones looks very similar. The Samsung has slightly less noise around the edge of the sign. The 3x zoom on the S24 Ultra is handled by a separate telephoto lens. On the new model, it's still a digital zoom. And of course, the advantage of the telephoto lens is obvious here. The text is clearer, the details are sharper, and there's less noise. 5x zoom, optical on both. Overall, the results look very similar, but in terms of details, the S24 Ultra definitely performs much better. 10x, and here again, Samsung delivers a more quality and clearer result. There's less noise and the detail is better. The 15x zoom doesn't look great on either smartphone, but Samsung has less noise and the small text is a bit better preserved. On the iPhone, that was the maximum zoom, but on the S24 Ultra, we can zoom in 20x. The quality is definitely weak, but we can still read even the small text that says "like this." I also tested the 8K zoom on the Samsung. The video from the main camera at 1x looks more quality and detailed. At 2x zoom, the detail is also better on the S24 Ultra, but unfortunately, both smartphones show chromatic aberrations, with color distortion around the edges of the sign. But I can say that without zooming, 8K is definitely more than a workable option for a quality picture. I also managed to test both smartphones in real conditions at a concert of the dancing ensemble Concord Orchestra. We can compare the sound recording, the camera performance in low light, and the quality and smoothness of the zoom ourselves. There's really no significant difference between the smartphones, either by ear or by eye. Both did pretty well, although I wouldn't recommend using the ultra-wide and maximum zoom in such conditions. We have an interesting situation with macro. With the 16 Pro Max, we can shoot macro up to 5x zoom. The telephoto lens itself, unfortunately, already gives out of focus in macro, but we can shoot with approximately 4.7x zoom. At the same time, with Samsung, macro is only available with 1.9x zoom, and after that, it goes out of focus. There is an option to shoot with 20x zoom, of course, but then the quality will be just terrible. Finally, the iPhone has brought in 120 frames in 4K, and what can I say? It looks great. I really like the result. In terms of quality, it's pretty much the same with Samsung. The only difference is in the color. The picture on the 16 Pro Max is cool, while the S24 Ultra has a warm tone. As for 240 frames, in Full HD, the iPhone has a slightly less noisy image, but overall, there's not a huge difference between the two videos. While recording the time lapses, we had some insane wind, so the phones were shaking. iPhone time lapse is disappointing. In Full HD in 2024 is just not serious, guys. On the other hand, to the naked eye, there isn't a huge difference in the quality of the time lapse itself. The building, sky, and water look more or less the same, with just a slight edge towards Samsung.
Guys, night has fallen, and now we're going to test the photo and video capabilities in low light conditions. So, let's go. So guys, we're currently shooting in 4K at 30 frames per second on both smartphones in low light conditions. Night has fallen, and we have artificial lighting here. The street lights are shining well. This is how we're shooting now with the light, and this is how it looks a bit against the light. Even against the light, everything is still looking quite nice and beautiful. 4K, 30 FPS on both smartphones.
In low light conditions, the difference between the front cameras is minimal. Samsung's picture is better. iPhone stabilizes better. The iPhone has this sandy tint again. It's a matter of taste, but I don't like it. As for stabilization, I feel like the iPhone did a better job, while the S24 Ultra's background shakes noticeably more.
Guys in the comments said that it's better to shoot at night on a smartphone in Full HD. Let's see if there's a difference between Full HD and 4K. Full HD is also at 30 frames per second. 4K is at 30 frames per second. There's quite a bit of light. Well, the little lights are actually shining pretty well. Sometimes, of course, I go into the shadows and it doesn't look great, but overall it's fine.
Personally, I don't see any advantage when shooting in Full HD. Overall, the picture is equally weak in both 4K and HD. I tried to shoot the same thing on the Samsung, and it's similar here. Let me know in the comments, guys, if you noticed any improvements.
Right now I'm shooting with the Running Man effect, which means super stabilization. But apparently in low light conditions, it's better not to use this mode. We have a crop and a camera shooting in 2.8K at 30 frames per second.
Both smartphones keep stabilization steady, but the quality is off. The Samsung is still somewhat okay, but the iPhone has a really dark picture. If enhanced stabilization works during the day, it definitely doesn't at night.
iPhones can also shoot on the front camera in ProRes RAW HDR. I've just activated this, and this is what the picture looks like. ProRes RAW HDR, the lighting here, it's really good. And the Samsung S24 Ultra is just shooting in 4K.
ProRes RAW is definitely not a workable option for shooting in low light. The files are really heavy, and they don't offer any advantage in color or quality at all.
Now we have a 4K 30 FPS shoot with a background blur effect. This is the front camera. Both the Samsung and the iPhone have really great front cameras. Basically, when there's plenty of light, I'm really happy with the quality of the video recording. Well, the truth is, when there's not much light, the iPhone immediately says it's too dark. Meanwhile, the Samsung doesn't say anything. So, this is the kind of image we have.
Portrait photography with the front camera definitely looks better in terms of color accuracy on Samsung. The face and colors look more natural, while on the iPhone, it's once again overexposed and yellowish. There are no complaints about the background blur and image quality. If there's enough light on the face, then it's actually a workable option for shooting. I tested both portrait stabilization and shooting in such conditions. Overall, the result is good, but in my opinion, the 16 Pro Max holds up better.
Shooting with an ultra-wide lens. iPhone 16 Pro Max 4K 30 FPS and Samsung S24 Ultra 4K 30 FPS. This is how I shoot myself when there's a lot of light on me. It's shining nicely. And this is how I'm shooting myself against the light. So there's a lot less light. The background is lit better.
The S24 Ultra performed better, with natural tones, while the iPhone's image is washed out. The S16 Pro Max is steadier, whereas Samsung shows shake and blur. The model is steadier than Samsung, which shakes and blurs. The iPhone's image is dull. S24 Ultra has better colors and less noise. When shooting everything around, the iPhone again produces a dull and lackluster image. I like the colors on the S24 Ultra more, and it seems to have better quality with less noise. On the other hand, it has a lot of shake again, and that's even more noticeable when running. The iPhone holds up fairly well while running, whereas the Samsung is all over the place.
And now I've activated the main lens 1x 4K 30 FPS on both smartphones. How's the image quality overall? There's a lot of light here again. I'm well lit, all around. So how do both smartphones perform overall?
The main camera is almost no different in quality, and in terms of color, it's the same as the ultra-wide one, and I again give preference to Samsung. Both of them did a good job with stabilization, so we turn the camera over and look at the footage of everything around. In terms of color and light, the S24 Ultra gets a thumbs up, with slightly better video quality. Testing stabilization, the iPhone struggles, while Samsung performs well. Shooting at 2x, there's not much difference. The iPhone is overexposed, Samsung has more noise. Samsung handles stabilization better, though not perfectly, while the iPhone struggles.
And now we have a video with a blur effect, a cinematic effect, 4K 30 FPS using the main lens, iPhone 16 Pro Max and Samsung.
In low light, both images look great, focus remains, and blur boundaries are fine. Both did well with stabilization, but Samsung starts losing focus.
The iPhone 16 Pro Max HDR 4K 30 FPS, and on the Samsung S24 Ultra, it's 8K 30 FPS. It's really interesting. After the new update, did they fix the focus in the 8K picture? Because the focus kept getting lost during low light situations.
Even in low light, both images look great here. The focus doesn't get lost, and there are no significant issues with the blur boundary. Both did well with stabilization too, but here Samsung has started to lose focus, unfortunately. As for Apple ProRes, I really don't like the colors and the overexposure in the image. In some details, be it grass or bushes, 8K seems to look better, but Samsung seems to have more blur. In general, there is no significant difference between 8K and 4K here. I tried running and both images shake quite a bit. In the end, I can say that neither of these modes gives us any advantage when shooting in low light while moving. The ultra-wide, just like during the day, works better on the iPhone here. Less glare from the streetlights, less noise, better detail. The main camera performed pretty much the same, but the 16 Pro Max has less glare from the sign, although there's more noise around the letters. The 2x digital zoom looks better on the Samsung, it handles the light source better, and the sign is readable, which can't be said for the iPhone. The same situation applies to the 3x zoom. The S24 Ultra connects the telephoto lens here, and it's noticeable. The 5x zoom, which is optical on both smartphones, looks very similar at first glance, but again, Samsung performs better in terms of detail. 10x video from Samsung turned out way better than from the iPhone. There's less noise, the details are preserved better, and the image is sharper. I can say the same about the 15x zoom, and on the 16 Pro Max this is the last zoom available. On the Samsung we can do a 20x zoom, and even then, the image will be better than the 15x on the iPhone. I'm testing the 8K zoom on the Samsung, and from the main camera, it loses a lot of detail. The sign is hard to see, and the gaps in the tiles have almost disappeared. At 2x zoom, 8K already has an advantage over the iPhone. The signs are less overexposed and look better. But at 5x zoom, Samsung again loses to the 16 Pro Max in quality and detail. The iPhone has preserved the sign and other details much better. It handles the light source better, and there's less noise. Here, I tested shooting in the logarithmic profile on the iPhone. Well, I can say that in low light, this isn't a workable option. There's no advantage in quality here, and it seems like there's more noise, especially when zooming in, and no color correction settings help to get rid of them. We're done with the video tests. Let's take a look at the photos. Let's start with color reproduction. On the ultra-wide, we have the same results as in the video tests. The iPhone is warmer, paler, and lighter. Samsung is cooler, more saturated, and has more contrast. The photo from the main camera looks almost identical, except that the S24 Ultra smooths and retouches the skin a bit more. It's clearer at 2x zoom. The telephoto lens also doesn't make any significant difference in color, just slight differences in skin tones and shades. By the way, if we go by the color of my sweater, the 16 Pro Max preserved a more true-to-life color, but personally, I prefer the enhanced version from Samsung. In landscape shots, again, the only difference is that Samsung makes the colors pop more, so it really comes down to personal taste. What's more important to you, naturalness or saturation? Let's take a selfie. Here, interestingly, the iPhone produces cooler photos. Photos look good on both, but the S24 Ultra shows processing and skin enhancement. A sunset selfie on the iPhone was vibrant. I also took a selfie at sunset, and here the result from the iPhone turned out to be more vibrant and brighter. Both did a great job with the background blur in the selfies, without any noticeable flaws at the blur edge. The main difference is that the iPhone smooths out the edge, while the Samsung has a sharper one. We're taking portrait photos with the main camera module. In terms of color, the 16 Pro Max gives a warmer and more vibrant result here, and it handles the blurring better in the details like right here. The portrait from the telephoto lens is richer and more beautiful, as for me, with the iPhone. But what's interesting is that here his photo turned out to be cold, while Samsung's was warm. I can confidently say that both smartphones are great for food shots. All the photos look delicious, with the iPhone being a bit cooler and the Samsung warmer. Here, I decided to test the new filters, or styles, that Apple added to its smartphones just this year. Well, what can I say? They're just filters with different color corrections, like in any other smartphone.
And this beautiful contrast thing only works if we don't have RAF activated. As soon as we activate RAF, this cool little screen thing disappears. As soon as we turn off RAF, we can immediately adjust the colors.
On the Samsung, I think the filters are more interesting and creative, even if there aren't that many of them. Here's one with interesting lighting, or my favorite, the color isolation effect, where a colored object or person stands out against a black and white background.
Guys, we've come to a cafe to do our favorite spoon test.
We're conducting this test to check how the blurring algorithms work with thin objects in the frame. And surprisingly, the iPhone 16 Pro Max completely failed this test, and even the Samsung handled almost all the photos better than the new model. When it comes to macro photography, I definitely preferred the iPhone here. Here you can achieve quite a powerful zoom, shooting almost up to 5 times zoom, while on the Samsung, the focus gets lost somewhere around 1.9x zoom, as I mentioned in the macro video. You can of course do 100 times zoom, but then you'll get a result like this. Yeah, the 16 Pro Max isn't amazing either, but the result is still clearer and of better quality. We're testing Photozoom. With the ultra-wide, the result turned out to be very similar. There's no noticeable difference. 1x main camera, and here it's the same, there's no difference in detail and quality. At 2 times zoom, the picture is a bit better and clearer on the S24 Ultra. It's no wonder Samsung claims that their 2x zoom is of optical quality. The optics on the Samsung, digital zoom on the 16 Pro Max. The advantage of the S24 Ultra is already noticeable. Higher clarity, less noise. 5 times zoom, telephoto lens on both smartphones. Here we again get very similar quality with a slight edge towards Samsung. The small text is a bit easier to read on it. At 10x, the S24 Ultra pulls ahead again. The text is perfectly readable, while on the iPhone, the letters are all blurry. The last 30x zoom on the iPhone, and once again, Samsung performed better here, with noticeably less noise and higher photo clarity and detail. On the S24 Ultra, we can zoom in up to 50x and even 100x, and at both of these magnifications, it still performs better than the 30x on the 16 Pro Max. Remember, the iPhones now have a 48 megapixel ultra-wide, while Samsung has a 12 megapixel one. We're testing, and here the result on the 16 Pro Max is just excellent compared to the S24 Ultra. On the main cameras, we have 48 megapixels on the iPhone and 200 megapixels on the Samsung, and they definitely look better. This is an image captured directly from the camera sensor, without any processing by the smartphone's algorithms. This means that we can process them ourselves and get interesting results. The raw images from the iPhone are definitely better, with a wider dynamic range. And with roughly the same processing in Lightroom, the results from the 16 Pro Max turn out to be more vibrant and beautiful. Both smartphones can take burst shots, a lot of shots in a short amount of time. We checked during the workout, and the result on the iPhone turned out to be weak. A lot of blurry photos. Samsung performs much better here. And it was getting dark. Let's go take some night photos. Let's start with color reproduction and overall photo quality. Here again, at all magnifications, the iPhone gives a warmer and more vibrant result. Samsung is more pale and cooler. We're shooting in ultra-wide everything around. The 16 Pro Max generally has darker photos, and it struggles a bit more with light sources, while the main camera on the S24 produces darker and more saturated photos. Let's take a look at selfies in low light. The iPhone's photos are more vibrant and contrasty, but in terms of quality, they clearly fall short compared to Samsung's. 16 Pro Max, pale yellow, S24 Ultra better. The photos from the 16 Pro Max are paler, and the skin has a yellowish tint again. And in the last shot, the advantage of the S24 Ultra is especially noticeable. It has less noise, the shot is clearer, and the quality is better. Portrait shots from the main camera on the iPhone look more vibrant. They're warmer than those from Samsung and just seem to be of higher quality. Both cameras handle the blur boundary well, with no issues on either side. Overall, all the photos are good. Let's test the zoom in low light. The ultra-wide on the 16 Pro Max falls short of Samsung in sharpness, but it has less noise. Main camera. The iPhone performed better here. It has less noise again, plus the shots are sharper. Plus, it preserved the color balance better. 2x digital zoom. Both photos turned out to be quite weak in detail, but the 16 Pro Max also had some aberrations. The optics on the Samsung. The photo is quite noisy, but the details are preserved better and the small text is more readable. At 5x zoom, the S24 Ultra's telephoto lens shows better sharpness. At 10x, quality is similar, but Samsung has less noise. The 30x zoom looks better again on the S24 Ultra, with sharper images and less noise, but the glare on the sign is less on the iPhone, and the small text is readable, unlike on Samsung. On the iPhone, this is the extreme zoom. On the S24 Ultra, I zoom in at 50x, and the result is again less noisy than on the iPhone, and the text is even small and quite readable. On the S24 Ultra, we can zoom in up to even 100x. Overall, Samsung gets a thumbs up here. We're testing high-resolution photos, and the ultra-wide shot at 48 megapixels on the iPhone preserved the colors better. But there's no detail at all. Sign is completely unreadable. It's a different story with the main camera. Here the colors look great, and the photo quality is impressive, even better than the 50 megapixels on Samsung. What's interesting is that all 50 megapixel photos from the S24 Ultra are inferior in quality and handling of light to regular 12 megapixel photos from the iPhone. We're testing raw photos at night. Just like in the daytime shots, the iPhone manages to achieve a better quality result by reducing noise and eliminating glare. Unfortunately, you can't achieve something like that on the Samsung. Night sky shots look better on the 16 Pro Max in my opinion. The sky itself, the clouds and the greenery all look great, but at the same time, the Samsung S24 Ultra captures a lot more stars, and the result is beautiful too. The 16 Pro Max is equipped with OLED Super Retina XDR. Samsung, on the other hand, has Dynamic AMOLED. I measured the flicker on both screens. At 100% and 50% brightness, the iPhone stayed around 22%. Samsung was showing around 35% flicker. But at minimum brightness, the iPhone screen shot up to almost 60%, which not be very good for your eyes. Even Samsung showed a rate that was 10% lower. The heart of the new device is the Apple A18 Pro processor, a fresh chip introduced at the same presentation as the new iPhones. The Samsung S24 Ultra, on the other hand, is equipped with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 for Galaxy. I ran performance tests in Geekbench and Antutu, but I have to point out that Antutu turned out to be irrelevant in this case. The thing is, I had different versions of this app on the Samsung and the iPhone. They differ in their scoring methods. In the end, the Samsung scored higher here, while in Geekbench, it scored lower. I measured the speed, Wi-Fi, and the mobile network. I'm measuring the Wi-Fi one at a time so the smartphones don't interfere with each other. And here, the 16 Pro Max got a really weak result. If you know what this might be related to, friends, please write it in the comments. It would really help me out. The speed on the Samsung is just amazing, no complaints at all. The mobile network speed for both upload and download turned out to be the same, and the numbers are pretty weak. Also, I'd like to point out that the new iPhone now creates two files for some videos and photos, the original and the processed one, just like it does on the Google Pixel 9 Pro XL. The 16 Pro Max now also processes files before uploading them to the disk, and here's how it looks.
Alright, let's start by talking about the pros.
48 megapixel camera instead of 12 megapixels, which has significantly improved the quality of photos and videos, including macro shots.
I really enjoyed taking macro photos and videos with it, getting up to 4.9x zoom thanks to this new ultra-wide lens.
Selfies in good lighting also look nice, although they don't match the Samsung's quality at night.
I really liked the quality of the slow motion video we shot with this smartphone. What else can I praise the iPhone 16 Pro Max for? This is definitely for cinematic shooting, especially with the main camera setup. Right now, this is the best smartphone for shooting video with a background blur effect. Here you can choose the focus just by tapping on the face. Focus is held very well, while the Samsung S24 Ultra also has excellent portrait shots with gorgeous background blur. But it doesn't handle focus as well as the iPhone 16 Pro Max does. There's also a challenging test in cinematic mode. The camera flies around the object. The iPhone does this better than anyone else on the market right now, as it shoots in 4K at 25 or 30 frames per second, and it does this without any lag or loss of focus. This time Samsung finally fixed the frame loss problem, but a new glitch appeared. Now Samsung constantly loses focus.
Portrait photos also look great. The blur edge is better than on the Samsung.
I also like shooting in log. While we can't shoot in log on the Samsung S24 Ultra, you can easily shoot in log on the iPhone 16 Pro Max and color the footage really well. There's one more point I wanted to mention. This is raw photo shooting. And if we compare these two smartphones, the raw photos on the iPhone 16 Pro Max smartphone are of higher quality. You can work with them a lot more than you can on the Samsung S24 Ultra. Honestly, I don't really like shooting raw photos on the Samsung S24 Ultra. Automatic raw photo shooting is not available at all. You have to manually adjust the exposure and shutter speed, which isn't always convenient. While on the iPhone 16 Pro Max, the algorithms work amazingly in automatic raw photo shooting. It was really convenient to do this. But Samsung has the Expert RAW app. And with this app, you can get some great raw shots. But to do this, first, you need to install this application and call it every time. It's not very convenient, but this app will really let you take some great raw photos on the Samsung S24 Ultra.
A controversial but possibly useful plus is the camera control. If you shoot a lot of horizontal content, then you'll like it. The filter options are also a nice little bonus in the camera.
So guys, we've talked about the pros, now let's move on to the cons. And the first downside is that the other lenses didn't get any updates, and in all the zoom tests, they completely lose to the Samsung S24 Ultra. I also didn't like the color reproduction when shooting video with the front and main cameras.
Sometimes the picture is overexposed, especially when shooting against the sun.
In general, this sandy color that Apple has in almost all iPhones when shooting video and photos always gives the picture a yellow tint, and in this smartphone, that yellowish tint really stands out. I don't like that. I find the colors produced by the Samsung S24 Ultra's camera much closer and more pleasant to me.
The time-lapse is still in full HD, and the screen doesn't dim during recording and doesn't show the time of the captured time-lapse. The spoon test for the iPhone completely failed and performed significantly worse in the test.
At the same time, the previous generation iPhones handled this test better than anyone else.
In addition, there are issues with Wi-Fi. At the same time, Samsung delivered excellent speed.
The smartphones are connected to the same router. The iPhone was showing speeds that were 3 to 4 times worse than what the Samsung S24 Ultra does. At the same time, the iPhone 16 Pro Max, just like the Samsung S24 Ultra, has a Wi-Fi 7 module. Guys, if you know what the reason might be, definitely let me know in the comments.
The packaging of the iPhone leaves much to be desired, but Samsung isn't far behind, of course.
This time, they didn't even include any stickers. I think next year there won't even be a cable included in the package. But Samsung is actually showing about the same results here. They, like Apple, only include a cable. And that's definitely a very bad trend. Friends, but if we sum up and choose the winner of this confrontation, then I think that, of course, in most tests, the Samsung S24 Ultra won. But the iPhone 16 Pro Max has its own advantages that the S24 Ultra doesn't. And if you think those advantages are significant, then definitely wait a bit and get yourself the brand new iPhone 16 Pro Max. If you like this video and find it useful, then be sure to like it, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments who you think won this test. iPhone 16 Pro Max or Samsung S24 Ultra. And goodbye everyone.